Black people are more likely to be wrongfully incarcerated for crimes they did not commit than any other group in America. According to the National Registry of Exonerations, while Black people are just over 13% of the U.S. population, there are 53% of the 3,200 exonerations since 1989. I analyzed the registry's numbers for Virginia. Data shows of the 64 people exonerated in the Commonwealth since 1989, half of them are Black men. While those men have been exonerated, there's a number of people who were freed because the evidence shows they're innocent. But the courts and previous governors have yet to exonerate them. As a few of them shared with me during a conversation at the UVA Innocence Project, those men are asking, what more do they have to prove?
They actually allowed me to be encaged in that prison.
A horrific experience shared among these men.
Incarceration is damaging to the mind, the body, and the spirit, especially the spirit.
Their bond forged in a bondage that evidence indicates they never should have endured.
The relationships that we shared, that's what helped me get through. We did it.
Each man convicted of crimes in the Commonwealth in the 90s when incarceration rates started soaring nationwide.
So you can clearly see that during our particular time of incarceration, something was wrong with the justice system.
Roger Fentress was 16 years old when he was convicted of murder in Richmond. He'd spent 24 years in prison when former Governor Ralph Northam set him free in 2020.
So I fainted when I was convicted, but I didn't cry or shed a tear when I was sentenced because I knew that wasn't my sentence. That ain't what God had for me.
Darnell Phillips was 19 years old when he was sentenced to life for the rape of a Virginia Beach girl. He was paroled in 2018 after nearly 28 years in prison.
And like they threw me away, you know, because like I didn't matter, like my life didn't matter, like my breath on earth didn't matter.
Messiah Johnson was 24 when he was sentenced to essentially life in prison for a beauty salon robbery in Norfolk. I broke the story about his quest for freedom in 2017. He was released by former Governor Terry McAuliffe the following year after 21 years in prison.
I fought for my freedom since day one, since the day they put the handcuffs on me.
In all, these men have spent more than 70 years behind bars.
This is a problem. It needs to be addressed.
The UVA Innocence Project estimates anywhere between 40,000 and 230,000 prisoners are actually innocent. So what's driving this? The National Registry of Exonerations points to mistaken witness identification, which is more likely to happen to people of color, misconduct, prosecutors, false or misleading evidence.
Seek justice and not conviction.
In Phillips' Virginia Beach case in 1990, the little girl identified him as the rapist, but Innocence Project attorneys learned that was only after Beach police misled the little girl about the weight of evidence against Phillips. Attorneys also learned that the DNA evidence excluded Phillips as the perpetrator. The victim now supports Phillips' exoneration.
You can clearly see that something was wrong.
In Fentress' case, the Innocence Project learned the woman who identified him in that 1996 Richmond murder told the detective she was intoxicated during the interrogations. She initially identified someone else, but the detective did not disclose that during the trial.
I want to be vindicated, and exoneration is my path to that.
And in Johnson's case, a victim in the 1997 Norfolk beauty salon robbery he was accused of identified him days later from a distance at night while police surrounded Johnson, the definition of a suggestive show-up. At sentencing, a family friend helped Johnson keep the faith.
My head must have went down a little bit. She had the awareness to say, hold your head up. We ain't gonna stop fighting.
Come on.
And I just kind of stood up straight, and I've been standing up straight since then.
Come on.
And now side by side with his brothers in their journey for justice.
I see Messiah like family.
Yeah,
that's how I
family.
see him as.
Yeah.
I met Roger and Roger like little brother.
I met his name. I just want to live.
And they are. Phillips is a pastor. Johnson has his own trucking business. Still, Virginia courts have failed to exonerate them. But Governor Glenn Youngkin can with an absolute pardon.
I just been waiting for someone to do the right thing. All I want is for that last shackle on me, that last shackle to be broken off of me. We're going to stand before God. My conscience is clear.
Governor Youngkin has until the end of his term to exonerate them, making them eligible for compensation from the state. But what's the solution to stop wrongful incarcerations in the first place? Some prosecutors say more diversity among prosecutors and police is a start, and tougher scrutiny of using eyewitness identification alone, which is the leading cause of wrongful convictions. You may remember my investigation into former Chesapeake basketball coach Brian Falcon's conviction. He was set free after our reports revealed the victim in a 2012 robbery identified him in a suggestive show-up, and our reports revealed the DNA collected from the crime scene did not match Falcon. He was freed in January and has yet to be exonerated either.
Chapter 6, The Negro and Psychopathology. Psychoanalytic schools have studied the neurotic reactions that arise among certain groups in certain areas of civilization. In response to the requirements of dialectic, one should investigate the extent to which the conclusions of Freud or of Adler can be applied to the effort to understand the man of color's view of the world. It can never be sufficiently emphasized that psychoanalysis sets as its task the understanding of given behavior patterns within the specific group represented by the family. When the problem is a neurosis experienced by an adult, the analyst's task is to uncover the new psychic structure and analogy with certain infantile elements, a repetition, a duplication of conflicts that owe their origin to the essence of the family constellation. In every case, the analytic clings to the concept of the family as a psychic circumstance and object. Here, however, the evidence is going to be particularly complicated. In Europe, the family represents, in effect, a certain fashion in which the world presents itself to the child. There are close connections between the structure of the family and the structure of the nation. Militarization of the centralization of authority in the country automatically entail a resurgence of the authority of the father. In Europe and in every country characterized as civilized or civilizing, the family is a miniature of the nation. As the child emerges from the shadow of its parents, he finds himself once more among the same laws, the same principles, the same values. A normal child that has grown up in a normal family will be a normal man. There's no disproportion between the life of the family and the life of the nation. Conversely, when one examines a closed society, that is, a society that has been protected from the flood of civilization, one encounters the same structures as those just described. Father Trails, and I'm gonna mess this up, Lamdu Pygmy d'Afrique, for instance, convinces us of that, although with every word, one is aware of the need to Christianize the savage Negro soul. The book's description of the whole culture, the conditions of worship, the persistence of rights, the survival of myths, have nothing of the artificial impression given by La Philosophie Bantouk. In both cases, the characteristics of the family are projected onto the social environment. It is true that the children of pickpockets or burglars accustomed to a certain system of clan law will be surprised to find out that the rest of the world behave differently. But a new kind of retraining, except in instances of perversion or arrested development, should be able to direct them into a moralization, a socialization of outlook. It is apparent in all such cases that the sickness lies in the family environment. For the individual, the authority of the state is a reproduction of the authority of the family by which he was shaped in his childhood. Ultimately, the individual assimilates all the authorities that he meets to the authority of the parents. He perceives the present in terms of the past. Like all other human conduct, behavior towards authority is something learned, and it is learned in the heart of a family that can be described from the psychological point of view by the form of organization peculiar to it, that is, by the way in which its authority is disturbed or exerted. Its authority is distributed or exercised. And this is a most important point, we observe the opposite in the man of color, right? A normal Negro child, having grown up within a normal family, will become abnormal to the slightest contact in the white world. This statement may not be immediately understandable. Therefore, let us proceed by going backward. Paying tribute to Dr. Brewer, Freud wrote, for this reason, Freud wrote, it is almost every case we could see that the symptoms were, so to speak, like residuals of emotional experiences to which, for this reason, we later gave the name psychic traumas. The individual characters were linked to the traumatic senses that had provoked them. According to the classic terminology, the symptoms were determined by scenes of which they were mnemonic residuals, and it was no longer necessary to regard them as arbitrary or enigmatic effects of the neurosis. In contrast, however, to what was expected, it was not always a single event that was the cause of the symptom. Most often, on the contrary, it arose out of multiple traumas, frequently analogous and repeated. As a result, it became necessary to reproduce chronologically this whole series of pathogenic memories, but in reverse order, the latest at the beginning and the earliest at the end. It was impossible to make one's way back to the first trauma, which is often the most forceful, if one skipped any of its successors. It cannot be stated more positively. Every neurosis has its origins in specific. So later, Freud added, this trauma, it is true, has been quite expelled from the consciousness and the memory of the patient, and as a result, he has apparently been saved from a great mass of suffering. But the repressed desire continues to exist in the unconscious. It is on watch constantly for an opportunity to make itself known, and it soon comes back into consciousness, but in a disguise that makes it impossible to recognize. In other words, the repressed thought is replaced in consciousness by another that acts as its surrogate. It's erstas, I guess that's it, erstas, and that soon surrounds itself with all those feelings of morbidity that had been supposedly averted by the repression. These Lebanese, I'm messing these words up. These Lebanese are repressed in the unconsciousness. What do we see in the case of the black man? Unless we make use of the frightening postulate, which so destroys our balance, offering by Jung the collective unconscious, we can understand absolutely nothing. A drama is enacted every day in colonized countries. How is one to explain, for example, that a Negro who has passed his baccalaureate and has gone on to Sorbonne to study to become a teacher of philosophy is already on guard before any conflictual elements have coalesced around him? Rene Menil accounted for this reaction in Hegelian terms. In his view, it was the consequence of the replacement of the repressed, or the African spirit, in the consciousness of the slave by the authority symbol representing the master, a symbol implanted by the subsoil of the collective group and charged with maintaining order in it as a garrison controls to the conquered city. We shall see in our section on Hegel that Rene Menil has made no misjudgment. Meanwhile, we have the right to put a question to ourselves. How is the presence of this reaction in the 20th century to be explained when in other ways there's complete identification with the white man? Very often, the Negro who becomes abnormal has never had any relations with whites, has some remote experiences been repressed in his unconscious. Did the little black child see his father beaten or lynched by a white man? Has there been a real traumaticism? To all of this, we have to answer no. Well, then, if we want to answer correctly, we have to fall back on the idea of collective catharsis. In every society, in every collectivity must exist a channel, an outlet through which the forces accumulated in the form of aggression can be released. This is the purpose of games in children's institutions and psychodramas and group therapy, and in a more general way of illustrated magazines for children. Each type of society, of course, requiring its own specific kind of catharsis. The Tarzan stories, the sagas of 12-year-old explorers, the adventures of Mickey Mouse, and all those comic books serve actually as a release for collective aggression. The magazines are put together by white men for little white men. This is the heart of the problem. In the Antilles, and there's every reason to think that the situation is the same in other colonies. These same magazines are devoured by the local children. In the magazines, the wolf, the devil, the evil spirit, the bad man, the savage are always symbolized by Negroes or Indians. Since there's always identification with the victor. Since there's always identification with the victor, the little Negro quite as easily as the little white boy becomes an explorer, an adventurer, a missionary who faces the danger of being eaten by the wicked Negroes. I shall be told that this is hardly important, but only because those who say it have not gotten much thought to the role of such magazines. Here's what Legman thinks of them. And this is G. Legman. With very rare exceptions, every American child who was 6 years old in 1938 had therefore assimilated at the very least 18,000 scenes of ferocious tortures and bloody violence, except the Boers. The Americans are the only modern nation that within the living memory has completely driven the population off the soil that it had occupied. America alone then could have had an uneasy national conscience to lull by creating the myth of the bad engine, in order later to be able to bring back the historic figure of the noble redskin vainly defending his lands against invaders armed with the rifles and Bibles. The punishment that we deserve can be averted only by denying responsibility for the wrong and throwing the blame on the victim, and proving, at least to our own satisfaction, that by striking the first and only blow, we were acting solely on the legitimate ground of defense. Anticipating the repercussions of these magazines or American culture, Legman went on. There's still no answer to the question whether this maniacal fixation on violence and death is the substitute for forbidden sexuality, or whether it does not rather serve the purpose of channeling along a line left open by sexual censorship. A sexual censorship, both the child's and the adult's desire for aggression against the economic and social structure, which, though with their entire consent, perverts them. In both cases, the root of the perversion, whether it be of a sexual or an economic character, is of the essence. That is why, as long as we remain incapable of attacking these fundamental repressions, every attack aimed at such simple escape devices as comic books will remain futile. The black schoolboy in the Antilles who is, in his lessons, is forever talking about our ancestors, the Gauls, identifies himself with the explorer, the bringer of civilization, the white man who carries truths to savages and all white truth. There's identification, that is. The young Negro subjectively adopts a white man's attitude. He invents the hero, who is white with all his own aggression, at that age closely linked to sacrificial dedication, a sacrificial dedication permeated with sadism. An 8-year-old child who offers a gift, even to an adult, cannot endure a refusal. Little by little, one can observe the youth Antillean, the formation and crystallization of an attitude and a way of thinking and seeing that are essentially white. When in schools, he has to read stories of savages told by white men. He always thinks of the Senegalese. As a schoolboy, I had my occasions to spend whole hours talking about the supposed customs of the savage Senegalese. And what was said there was a lack of awareness that was at the very least paradoxical, because the Antillean does not think of himself as a black man. He thinks of himself as an Antillean. The Negro lives in Africa. Subjectively, intellectually, the Antillean conducts himself like a white man, but he is a Negro that he will learn once he goes to Europe. And when he hears Negroes mentioned, he will recognize that the word includes himself as well as the Senegalese. What are we to conclude on this matter? Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, continuing my reading of Frantz Fanon's book, Black Skin, White Mask. This is chapter 6, The Negro and Psychopathology, right? And so, listening to what we read, remember last chapter we talked about the white gaze, how black people are seen through the context and the eyes of whiteness. The black world is set up through the eyes and the context of whiteness. Everything in the world is set up through the gaze and the eyes of whiteness, especially the existence of black people. So now we're getting into Fanon talking about how the black man's psychological state is erroneously analyzed by white people because they're still analyzing the psychology of the black person through the white gaze, and they're purposely missing things. And even sometimes it may be unconscious that they're missing things, but it's the purposeful misunderstanding or the mislabeling of black people to the detriment and for the detriment of black people. So that goes to the opening video with the black men talking about black men being falsely incarcerated because they're being falsely labeled. And then remember, we are being framed through the white gaze, and through the white gaze, black men are criminals, black men are vagabonds, black men are lowlifes, right? Black people are, but especially black men. So there has to be a psychosis. There has to be trauma, as I was reading. There has to be a genesis to the psychosis, to the psychopathology of black people. Basically, black equals a pathology. If you are black, you have a pathology. If you are black, you're a psychopath. Black equals psychopathology. You're a psychopath if you're black, right? So our chapter focus, of course, you know, we're going to get on that. Got to get into our key points, our main argument, and then, you know, this one don't have a closing thing, but we're getting into our main argument and all these things here, right? So our chapter focus for chapter 6, the Negro and psychopathology. So Fanon, who is a trained psychiatrist, he examines how racism, colonialism, and cultural domination shape psychological development. He critiques European psychoanalysis, especially Freud and Jung, showing how theories built on white European experiences fail to explain the psychological realities of black people in colonized societies, right? So white people only having their white experiences, but also viewing black people through the white gaze, they are going to miss every time. And so Fanon is looking at, okay, we're analyzing black people in a white world, under a white system, under white control, through a white gaze. And we're not analyzing black people fairly because these people are not even in their natural state, in a natural existence. We don't even know what that is anymore. It's been so long. But also, it's still under the thumb of white supremacy. It's still under the system of white supremacy. It's still dealing with the psychology of the black person, or the pathology or the psychopathology of a black person that has only existed under the system of white supremacy. So if I've only existed under the system of white supremacy, and it's been a system that has been designed to beat me down, my psychological state won't be what you expect it to be. Like when Fanon was talking about how the family, the values of the family would mirror the values of the society. And so the values of the black family wouldn't necessarily mirror the values of a white society. So when that black child goes out into that white society, that black child will either not fit into white society or be broken to fit into white society. Right? But there's a psychological component that goes to that. What damage happens to a black child that after they come out of this black house, and no telling what they experienced as a child living in a black house under the system of white supremacy. Don't know what they experienced then, but what trauma or what negative effects comes out of having to be broken, having your mind and your psychology and your experiences, everything to be broken, told, no, this is wrong. You have to do this to fit into this society. And once you fit into this society, the society takes a dump on you. Right? Because the idea isn't to create a race of exceptional people. That's not what white supremacy is here to do. It's clearly set up to continue to dominate black people in every facet of life. So to continue to do that, we have to make sure that black people are continuously oppressed. There have to be systems in place to keep Black people at a subservient level. So what effects do those have on Black people? But also, how do you accurately and fairly analyze Black people through your white lens, through your white experience under the system of white supremacy, and not be able to understand the effects and the existence, the effects the existence of white supremacy has had on Black people, like psychologically, emotionally, like mentally, all those different areas, physically, the epigenetical effects that it could have. So just I'm with Fanon on this, because it's like a polar bear trying to analyze a catfish. A polar bear analyzing a catfish, and the polar bear posing itself as an expert on the psychology of the catfish because they have the catfish caged. So you're only analyzing the behavior of the catfish, or the behavior of Black people is only being analyzed behind the cage, I would say. So it's like the zookeepers looking at wolves in the zoo and saying, this is how wolves are supposed to exist. No, my psychology has been warped because of your oppression. So that's what we're getting into. So our key points would be: psychology must be seen in context of racism and colonialism. He also gets into a critique of Freud's Oedipus complex, and that needs to be critiqued. Black childhood and internalized racism, the link between neurosis and racism, sexuality and racial fantasy, the failure of European psychoanalysis for Black patients, and toward a liberation psychology. And then, of course, we get into the main argument. So psychology must be seen in the context of racism and colonialism. So 2 points on this one. Fanon argues that you cannot analyze the psychology of Black people outside the social and historical context of white supremacy, right? We don't know what it's like to exist outside the system of white supremacy. So there's no fair psychological analysis of Black people, because all we know is the system of white supremacy. All we understand is the system of white supremacy. All we have ever been able to exist under is the system of white supremacy. So of course our psychology will be warped. So it will not be a fair psychological assessment, because once again, it's like assessing the psychology and the behavior of encaged wolves who 400 generations have been encaged, versus the wild wolf. Also, the second bullet point in this one is: racism is not prejudice, right? It is a system that shapes the unconscious, the body, and the social relationships, right? It's not, well, I don't like you because you Black. That's not about racism. Racism was created to help support and explain and help to define why white supremacy should exist. To say these Negroes are uncivilized, and this is why these Negroes are uncivilized. We are here in this hierarchical order, and they are here. So because they are here, we must civilize them. Racism was created to justify white supremacy, and the prejudice is just a preference for or against something. Yes, prejudice do exist within the context of racism and the white supremacy, but it is not racism. It's totally different. So I'm with him on that. So let's get back into the reading. This is page 148, the final paragraph on 148. And then, of course, get back to these key points as we go. So make sure y'all hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share. Make sure you catch the next video coming up, and check out some of these older videos on my channel. I got a lot of good content. I've been making videos for 11 years. It's 11 years worth of content on the channel. Please check it all out, and tell a friend, and hit that like button one more time, comment and share, and please support. To impose the same evil spirits on the white man and on the Black man is a major error in education. If one is willing to understand the evil spirit in the sense of an attempt to personify the id, the point of view will be understood. If we are utterly honest, We must say that children's cutting out rhymes are subject to the same criticism. It will have already been noticed that I should like nothing more or nothing less than the establishment of children's magazines, especially for Negroes, the creation of songs for Negro children, and ultimately the publication of history texts, especially for them, at least through the grammar school grades. Shout out to myself because I did that. For until there is evidence to the contrary, I believe that if there is a traumaticism, that it occurs during those years. The young Antillian is a Frenchman called on at all times to live with the white compatriots. One forgets this rather too often. The white family is the agent of a certain system. The society is indeed the sum of all families in it. The family is an institution that prefigures the broader institution, the social or the national group. Both turn on the same axis. The white family is the workshop in which one is shaped and trained for life in society. The family structure is internalized in the superego. Marcus says, and projected into political, though I would say social behavior. As long as he remains amongst his own people, the little black fellow follows very nearly the same course as the little white. But if he goes to Europe, he will have to reappraise his lot. For the Negro in France, which is his country, will feel different from other people. One can hear the glib remark, the Negro makes himself inferior, but the truth is that he is made inferior. The young Antillian, a Frenchman, called upon constantly to live with white compatriots. Now the Antillian family has for all practical purposes no connection with the national, that is the French or European structure. The Antillian has therefore to choose between his family and European society. In other words, the individual who climbs up into society, white and civilized, tends to reject his family, black and savage, on the plane of imagination, in accord with the childhood Lebanese that we discussed earlier. In this case, the schema of Marcus becomes, and it says, and it's showing family. It's three words: family, individual, and society. And it's saying the individual is arrows pointed to the family and society. And the family structure is the cast back to the id. The Negro recognizes the unreality of many of the beliefs that he has adopted with reference to the subjective attitude of the white man. When he does, his real apprenticeship begins. A reality proves to be extremely resistant, but it will be objective if you are merely describing a universal phenomenon, the criterion of maturity being a fact adaptation to society. My answer is that such a criticism goes off in the wrong direction, for I have just shut down that for the Negro. There's a myth to be faced, a solidity established myth. The Negro is unaware of it as long as his existence is limited to his own environment. But the first encounter with the white man oppresses him with the whole weight of his blackness. There is the unconscious. Since the racial drama is played out in the open, the black man has no time to make it unconscious. The white man, on the other hand, succeeds in doing so to a certain extent because a new element appears: guilt. The Negro's inferiority or superiority complex, or his feeling of equality, is conscious. The feelings forever chill him. They make his drama. In him, there is none of the effective amnesia characteristics of the typical neurotic. Whenever I have read a psychoanalytic work, discussed problems with my professors, or talked with European patients, I have been struck by the disparity between the corresponding schemas and the reality that the Negro presents. It has led me progressively to the conclusion that there is a dialectical substitution when one goes from the psychology of the white man to that of the black. Right? The earliest values with Charles Odier describes are different in the white man and in the black man. A drive toward socialization does not stem from the same motivations. In co-actuality, we change worlds. A close study should be divided into two parts. One, a psychoanalytic interpretation of the life experiences of the black man, and two, a psychoanalytic interpretation of the Negro myth. But reality, which is our only recourse, prevents such procedures. The facts are more complicated. What are they? The Negro is a phobogenic object. a stimulus to anxiety. From the patient treated by Soro and Capargas to the girl who confides to me that to go to bed with a Negro would be terrifying to her. One discovers all the stages of what I shall call the Negro phobogenesis. There has been much talk of the psychoanalysis in connection with the Negro, distrusting the ways in which it might be applied. I have preferred to call this chapter the Negro and psychopathology, well aware that Freud and Adler and even the cosmic Young did not think of the Negro in all their investigations, and they were quite right not to have. It is too often forgotten that neurosis is not a basic element of human reality. Like it or not, the Oedipus complex is far from coming into being among Negroes. It might be argued, as Milanowski contends, that the matriarchal structure is the only reason for its absence. But putting aside the question whether the ethnologists are not imbued with the complexities of their own civilization, that they are compelled to try to find them duplicated in the peoples they study, it will be relatively easy for me to show that in the French Antilles, 97% of the families cannot produce one edible neurosis. This incapacity is one in which we hardly congratulate ourselves. With the exception of a few misfits within the closed environment, we can say that every neurosis, every abnormal manifestation, every effective erythism in the Antillean is the product of its cultural situation. In other words, there is a constellation of postulates, a series of proportions that slowly and subtly, with the help of books, newspapers, schools, and their text, advertisements, film, radio, work their way into one's mind and shape one's view of the world of the group to which one belongs. In the Antilles, that view of the world is white because no black voice exists. The folklore of Martinique is meager. A few children in Fort-de-France know the stories of Comte Lapin, twin brother of Burr Rabbit, of Louisiana's Uncle Remus. A European familiar with the current trends of Negro poetry, for example, would be amazed to learn that as late as 1940, no Antillean found it possible to think of himself as a Negro. It was only with the appearance of Aimé Césaire that the acceptance of negritude, that the statement of its claims began to be perceptible. The most concrete proof of this, furthermore, is that feeling which pervades each new generation of students arriving in Paris. It takes them several weeks to recognize that contact with Europe compels them to face a certain number of problems that until their arrival had never touched them, and yet these problems were by no means visible. And so, get to our second key point. This is Fanon's critique of Freud's Oedipus complex that we just kind of covered, right? Fanon challenges Freud's theory that the Oedipus complex is universal. And I challenge that too. Freud, you nasty, y'all folk nasty. No, Sigmund Freud, no, all groups of people on earth do not have thoughts of messing with their mamas. Men in other areas of the world, trust me, do not have thoughts en masse of messing with their mamas. Like you said, with the exception of a few misfits. No Sigmund Freud, no European culture. No, we don't want to sleep with our mothers. We don't have those complexes. Trust me, we got other issues, but not that. So I'm with them on that. That is not something universal. That may be something that can be found maybe widely. I don't know, because I don't know how far or how prevalent the Oedipus complex is in European society. But from what I could guesstimate and from the narratives that exist, it's a lot more prevalent in European cultures, families, and societies than it ever will be in African cultures, families, and societies. Now, like you talk about the misfits, now we're talking about the degrading of our morals and values. With the degradation of our morals and values, you might find it more commonplace, but no. So the second thing is he insists that the development of black children differs under colonialism because their earliest experiences are shaped by racism and inferiority complexes imposed by white society. So, right. So I would not see the world and experience the world the same as a white child or a white man two different experiences. Even if you're a white dude who grew up in the hood, you have no idea what I experienced, especially if I'm in an area where there's racism is prevalent. It's a lot more prevalent. It's a lot more in your face. It's a lot more felt than other areas, right? Because a lot of times in a lot of places, people like racism don't exist. And, you know, everybody don't have the same experiences. But my experience as a black person, because like was read earlier, stepping into the white world, coming out of the black family, stepping into the white world, you have to make a readjustment. You have to say, whoa, this is different. This is not what I grew up with. So yes, our development is definitely different. And then it says, for black children, trauma is not rooted in family rivalry, but in racial oppression and societal rejection. Yes. So now I would say maybe nowadays it can be rooted in family rivalry, but that family rivalry is still rooted in racial oppression and societal rejection. The white society pulled its pants down and took a dump on the black society. So black people, we have trauma. Black people, we experience trauma. Black people, we do have psychological defects and all those things, and mental declining in some kind of mental cognitive abilities and emotional abilities and stuff. We're not good. The bulk of us are not good, but we can work to make ourselves better though, by understanding what has happened to us, right? So whenever I had a discussion with my professors or talked with European patients, I became aware of the differences that might prevail between the two worlds. Talking recently to a physician who had always practiced and fought in France, I told him what conclusions I had arrived at. He went further, saying that they were valid not only in the psychopathology, but also in the general medicine. In the same way, he added, you never encounter a case of pure typhoid such as you studied in the textbooks. There's always a more or less manifest complication of malaria. It will be interesting to study, for example, a case of schizophrenia as experienced by a Negro, if indeed that kind of malady were to be found there. What am I getting at? Quite simply this. When the Negro makes contact with the white world, a certain sensitizing action takes place. If this psychic structure is weak, one observes a collapse of the ego. The black man stops behaving as an actional person. The goal of his behavior will be the other, in the guise of the white man, or the other alone he can give him worth. That is on the ethical level, self-esteem, but there's something else. I've said that the Negro is phobogenic. Excuse me, it's phobogenic. What is phobia? I prefer to answer that question by relying on the latest work of Hinsnard. Phobia is a neurosis characterized by anxious fear of an object, or in the broadest sense of anything outside of the individual, or by extension of a situation. Naturally, that object must have certain aspects. It must arouse, Hinsnard says, both fear and revulsion. But here we encounter a difficulty applying the genetic method to the understanding of phobia. Charles Odier wrote that all anxiety derives from a certain subjective insecurity linked to the absence of the mother. This occurs, according to Odier, sometime in the second year of life. Investigating the psychic structure of the phobic, he comes to this conclusion: before attacking the adult beliefs, all the elements of the infantile structure which produce them must be analyzed. The choice of the phobic object is therefore overdetermined. This object does not come at random out of the void of nothingness. In some situation, it has previously evoked an effect in the patient. His phobia in the latent presence of this effect at the root of his world, there's an organization that has been given a form. For the object naturally need to be there, it is enough that somewhere it exists. It is a possibility. The object is endowed with the intentions and with all the attributes of a malefic power. And the phobic effect is a priority that defines all rational thinking. As we can see, the phobic is a person who is governed by the laws of irrational perilogic and effective perilogic, of a prelogic and effective prelogic, methods of thinking and feeling that go back to the age at which he experienced the event that impaired his security. The difficulty indicated, here it is. Was there a trauma harmful to security in the case of the young woman whom we mentioned a little earlier? In the majority of negrophobic men, has there been an attempt at grape, an attempt at fellatio, proceeding with complete orthodoxy? We should be led by the application of analytic conclusions to this. If an extremely frightening object, such as a more or less imaginary attacker, arouses terror, that is also, for most often, such cases are those of women, and especially a terror mixed with sexual revulsion. I'm afraid of men really means at the bottom of the motivation of the fear, because they might do all kinds of things to me, but not commonplace cruelties, sexual abuses, in other words, immoral and shameful things. Contact alone is enough to evoke anxiety. For contact is at the same time the basic schematic type of intimidating sexual action, touching caresses sexuality. Since we have learned to know all the tricks the ego uses in order to defend itself, we know too that it denies most and no common sense to be taken literally. Are we not now observing a complete inversion? Basically, does this fear of grape not itself cry out of grape? Just as there are faces that ask to be slapped, can one not speak of women who ask to be graped? And if he hollers, let him go. Chester Himes describes this type very well. The big blonde trembles whenever the Negro grows near her. Yet she has nothing to fear, since the factory is full of white men. In the end, she and the Negro go to bed together. When I was in the military service, I had the opportunity to observe the behavior of white women from 3 or 4 European countries when they're among the Negroes at dance. Most of the time, the women made involuntary gestures of fight and withdrawing, their faces filled with a fear that was not feigned. And yet the Negroes who asked them to dance would have been utterly unable to commit any act at all against them, even if they had wished to do so. The behavior of these white women is clearly understandable from the standpoint of imagination. That is because the negrophobic woman is in fact nothing but a putative sexual partner, just as the negrophobic man is a repressed homosexual. And so Fanon talks about the link between neurosis and racism. Racism produces psychological disorders, anxiety, self-hatred, feelings of inferiority, and identity conflicts. Racism is traumatic experiences on top of the other, just continuously happening, right? Fanon criticizes psychiatrists who treat Black patients' symptoms without acknowledging the social causes of racism itself. Most psychiatrists really don't know. And so that's why we need more African-centered Black psychiatrists out there to be able to help our people who are dealing with the mental health issues, dealing with the trauma of being Black in a white society. We need more Fanons. We need more Black psychologists. All right. Shout out to the Association of Black Psychologists too, right? But being able to understand that, right? Racism produces psychological disorders, anxiety, self-hatred, feelings of inferiority, and identity conflicts. The Black person under colonial rule can develop neurosis directly tied to systematic racism, right? Fanon criticizes psychiatrists who treats Black patients' symptoms without acknowledging the social cause, right? I had to read it again. So let's get into sexuality and racial fantasy, right? Which we were just talking about, which we were just reading, rather. Fanon explores how racism distorts sexuality, right? So think about what I just read. The white woman can, upon seeing the Black man, fear him, tremble in fear, have all types of thoughts of fear, even though she's in an environment filled with white men. And despite all of that fear that she has because of what she's learned about the Black man, she will still sleep with him and go to bed with him because of what of all she learned about the Black man, right? Stereotypes of the Black man as hypersexual and primitive, and the Black woman as exotic shape how both are treated in relationships. Sex objects like the Black woman is that thought that want to go out there and bust it wide open, twerking everywhere, and the Black man has a dingus hanging down to his knee, and he'll knock you down for 52 hours straight. We're like, the Black men and Black women have both been labeled as sexual deviants, right? These myths often cause deep psychosexual anxieties and complexities affecting intimacy and self-perception. And that's real. How you see yourself would definitely affect the way you relate intimately with others. In relation to the Negro, everything takes place on the genital level. A few years ago, I remarked to some friends during a discussion that in a general sense, the white man behaves toward the Negro as an elder brother reacts to the birth of a younger. I have since learned that Richard Straber arrived at the same conclusion in America. I'm gonna read that again. He says, the white man behaves toward the Negro as an elder brother reacts toward the birth of a younger. On the phenomenological level, there would be a double reality to be observed. The Jew is feared because of his potential of acquisitiveness. They are everywhere. The banks, the stock exchange, the government are infested with them. They control everything. Soon the whole country will belong to them. They do better in examinations on the real French than the real Frenchman. Soon they will be banking. Soon they will be making the laws for us. Not so long, an acquaintance studying for the civil service said to me, say what you want. They take good care of one another. When Monk was in power, for instance, the number of I'm gonna have to edit that out, but the number of blanks in government jobs was appalling. In the medical profession, the situation is no different. Every Jewish student who wins a prize in the competition does it through pool. As for the Negroes, they have tremendous sexual powers. What do you expect with all the freedom they have with their jungles? They copulate at all times and in all places. They are really genital. They have so many children that they cannot even count them. Be careful, or they will flood us with mulattoes. Things are indeed going to hell. The government and the civil service are at the mercy of the Jews. Our women are at the mercy of the Negroes. For sexual potency of the Negro is hallucinating. That is indeed the word. The potency must be hallucinating. Psychoanalysis, who studied the problem, soon enough find the mechanisms of every neurosis. Sexual anxiety is predominant here. All the negrophobic women I have known had abnormal sex lives. Their husbands had left them, or they were widows, and they were afraid to find a substitute for the dead husband, or they were divorced and they had doubts about the thought of a new object investment. All of them endowed the Negro with powers that other men's husbands, transient lovers, did not have. And besides, there was also an element of perversion, the persistence of infantile formations. God knows how they make love. It must be terrifying. There's one expression that through time has become singularly eroticized, the black athlete. There's something in the mere idea. One young woman confided to me that makes the heart skip a beat. A prostitute told me that in her earlier days, the mere thought of going to bed with a Negro brought on an orgasm. She went in search of Negroes and never asked them for money. But she added going to bed with them was no more remarkable than going to bed with a white man. It was before I did it that I had the orgasm. I used to think about, imagine all the things they might do to me, and that was what was terrific. Wow. Still on the genital level, when a white man hates black men, he is not yielding to a fleeing of impotence or of sexual inferiority. Since his idea of an infantile virality, is there not a phenomenon of demunitation in relation to the Negro, who is reviewed as a penis symbol? Is the lynching of a Negro not a sexual revenge? We know how much of sexuality there is in all cruelties, tortures, beatings. One has only to reread a few pages of the Marquis de Sade to be easily convinced of the fact. Is the Negro superiority real? Everyone knows that it is not, but it is not what matters. The pre-logical thought of the phobic, which has decided that such is the case. Another woman developed a Negrophobia after she had read Geray Crusher, Solvos, Tombols. I tried to demonstrate the irrationality of her position by pointing out to her that victimized white women were as sick as the Negroes. Besides, I added, This was no case of black revenge, of black vengeance, as the title of the book might seem to imply, because the author was a white man. Boys vain. I had to accept the futility of all such efforts. That young woman did not want to listen. Anyone who has read the book will understand at once the ambivalence of her phobia revealed. I knew a Negro medical student who would not dare to make a vaginal examination of any patient in the gynecological clinic. He told me that one day he had heard one of them say, "There's a nigger in there. If he touches me, I'll slap his face." You never know with them. He must have great big hands, and besides, he's sure to be rough. If one wants to understand the racial situation psychoanalytically, not from a universal viewpoint, but as it is experienced by individual consciousness, considerable importance must be given to sexual phenomena. In the case of the Jew, one thinks of money and the cognates. In that of the Negro, one thinks of sex. Anti-Semitism can be rationalized on a basic level. It is because he takes over the country as the Jew is a danger. And an acquaintance told me recently that although he was not an anti-Semite, he'd be constrained to admit that the majority of Jews whom he had known during the war had behaved very badly. I tried in vain to get him to concede that such a statement was the fruit of a determined desire to find the essence of the Jew wherever he might exist. On a clinical level, I am reminded of the story of the young woman who suffered from a kind of tactile delirium, constantly washing her hands and arms ever since the day a Jew had been introduced to her. Jean-Paul Sartre has made a masterful study of the problem of anti-Semitism. Let us try to determine that are the constituents of Negrophobia. This phobia is to be found on an instinctual biological level. At the extreme, I should say that the Negro, because of his body, impedes the closing of a postural schema of the white man at the point naturally at which the black man makes his entry into the phenomenal world of the white man. This is not the place in which to state conclusions I drew from studying the influence exerted on the body by the appearance of another body. Let us assume, for example, that 4 15-year-old boys, all more or less athletic, are doing the high jump. One of them wins by jumping 4 feet 10 inches. Then a fifth boy arrives and tops the mark by a half inch. The four other bodies experience a destruction. What is important to us here is to show that with the Negro, the cycle of the biological begins. No anti-Semite, for example, will ever conceive of the idea of castrating the Jew. He is killed or sterilized. But the Negro is castrated. The penis is the symbol of manhood, is annihilated, which is to say that it is denied. The difference between the two attitudes is apparent. The Jew is attacked for his religious identity and his history, in his race, in his relations with his ancestors and with his posterity. When one sterilizes a Jew, one cuts off the source. Every time that a Jew is persecuted, it is the whole race that is persecuted in this person. But it is in his corporeality that the Negro is attacked. It is as a concrete personality that he is lynched. It is an actual being that he is a threat. The Jewish menace is replaced by the fear of sexual potency of the Negro. Old Manny said, an argument widely used by racialists against those who do not share the convictions is worthy of mention for its revealing character. What they say, if you had a daughter, do you mean to say that you would marry her to a Negro? I've seen people who appear to have no racialist bias lose all critical sense when confronted with this kind of question. The reason is that such an argument disturbs certain uneasy feelings in them, more exactly incestuous feelings, and they turn to racialism as a difference reaction. And I'm gonna stop my reading there. But let me give you these last couple key points. Then I'll close this out and I'll sum this thing up, right? The next point is the failure of European psychoanalysis for Black patients. Fanon criticizes white psychiatrists for trying to apply European models without considering colonial oppression, right? He argues that black pathology cannot be understood outside racism. Without this context, Psychiatric treatment becomes harmful rather than healing because you're trying to heal something you don't understand. So I have a broken foot, but you're trying to fix my hand. Towards a liberation psychology. Fanon emphasizes the need for psychology that recognizes the social, cultural, and historical trauma of colonialism. That's why we need more Black psychologists, more African-centered psychology. True healing for the Black person requires dismantling racist structures and affirming Black humanity and identity, right? His main argument for chapter 6 is that the psychological struggles of Black people cannot be understood without analyzing racism and colonial domination. European psychoanalysis fails because it ignores the role of white supremacy in shaping Black identity, neurosis, and self-image. A new psychology rooted in liberation is necessary for healing, right? So to tie everything together, right? The black man, Black people, or especially the Black man, but Black people are looked at in a specific way through this white gaze. We are psychopaths, right? So if you're Black, you're a psychopath. And because you're a psychopath, you have to be treated a certain way. You have to be acculturated a certain way. But Fanon is getting at, we're not psychopaths. We're not criminals. We're not all these things. We're victims of white supremacy. Living under a system of white dominance, white supremacy for over 400 years will have a negative psychological and emotional, physical, spiritual effect on any group of people. You subjugate any living being, they won't operate the same as the ones who are doing the subjugation. And so it is unfair to look at the subjugated through the eyes of the ones who are doing the subjugation. That's the error in the ways of the white psychiatrists, and that's what Fanon is getting at. So it leads back to the video in the beginning. The Black men got locked up because of how white men view us, and Black men and Black women are viewed as sexual objects because of how white people view us, and white people view us as psychopaths because they view us through their lens under the system of white supremacy, and not taking into account that we have been victimized by the system of white supremacy. Thus, that victimization leads us to think, live, behave, and exist the way we do. And yes, we do have mental disorders. And those mental disorders, like you said, are anxiety, self-hatred, feelings of inferiority, and identity conflicts. Yes, those things do exist. They are prevalent, and especially in these modern times, because the system of white supremacy has not changed. It just refined itself and got stronger. So that's how it go down. So that's chapter 6 of Frantz Fanon's book, Black Skin, White Mask, The Negro and Psychopathology. And make sure you click the link in the description to get your copy of the book if you haven't gotten already, because you're tripping. And the pages of this chapter, let me see. I gotta scroll down and scroll up so I give you all the pages of the chapter. It is, and remember, this chapter 6, so I think we got 2 more chapters left. I'm almost at the end. Hold on. It's a long old chapter, but I gave you a summary of the chapter. It's a long chapter. All right. So it goes from, all right, so it ends on 209. And it starts on, hold on. All right. It ends on 209. Make sure I hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share as well. Make sure this information gets out. This is a great book. I'm glad you all chose this book. This is a great book to read so we can understand the psychology of white supremacy and the white supremacists, but also ourselves, what has happened to us. So Fanon does a great job. So shout out to Frantz Fanon. All right. Chapter 6 starts on page, I'm almost there. Greatly. Y'all can hear me scrolling. Shoot. It's a long, long, long chapter. All right. ontheshoulders1.com is the website. Make sure you visit it. Once again, hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share, support Patrick, support PC. The links to support both of them is in the description. Once again, the link to get this book is in the description. So make sure you do that. If you don't have your copy, you tripping. And so it starts on page 141 and ends on 209. Chapter 6, the Negro and Psychopathology. Amen. I love you all. Make sure y'all continue being y'all great selves. Let's unite. Let's get better. And let's start winning. Let's start winning. Like my man Nemesis X. Let's start winning. Catch y'all on the other side. Peace out.